15 credits. That's the price of a watered-down synthetic beer on the promenade. I spent it on a 2-million-ton slab of dead titanium the whole galaxy called a coffin. They laughed when I signed the registry. They stopped laughing when that scrap metal changed the course of the war. The air in Auction Bay 4 smelled like stale sweat, ozone, and desperation. It was a smell I knew well. I sat in the back row of the amphitheater, nursing a lukewarm coffee that tasted vaguely of engine runoff. Down on the floor, the auctioneer was sweating through his suit. He went by Wallace. It was a Western human name he'd adopted to make himself seem more trustworthy to the Terran scavengers who frequented this dump. It didn't work. He was a multi-eyed bureaucrat from the core worlds, and his disdain for the outer rim was painted all over his rigid posture. Wallace wiped a manipulator across his forehead and tapped the podium. The main hololith flickered. A jagged, ugly silhouette materialized in the blue light above his head. "Item 73, Wallace droned, his voice echoing off the corrugated steel walls. Designation, Hull 404. Obsolete heavy assault vessel. Unknown origin, though the structural schematics suggest pre-coalition Terran design. No energy shielding, no active plasma webbing, no zero-point drive." A collective murmur of disgust rippled through the crowd. The auction house was full of sleek, elegant species. The Zor, the Kalan, beings who built ships out of glass and spun light, vessels that danced through the void, protected by shimmering energy fields. To them, Hull 404 wasn't just a ship. It was an insult to modern engineering. I leaned forward. My mag boots clanked against the grated floor. The ship in the hologram was a bruiser. It had no curves, no aerodynamic grace. It was a brutalist wedge of layered armor, entirely devoid of the glowing fins and delicate thrusters the rest of the galaxy loved. It looked like a flying anvil. Armor plating consists of alternating layers of depleted uranium, tungsten, and a carbon weave composite, Wallace continued, sounding almost embarrassed to be reading the specs. Total mass is prohibitive. The towing costs alone to move this vessel to a smelting facility exceed its raw material value. Ergo, it is being sold as is, where is, in orbital tether lock 9. He paused, looking out at the crowd with all 4 of his primary eyes. Bidding starts at 1,000 credits. Silence. Someone in the second row scoffed. A Zir merchant picked at his fingernails. 1,000 credits was pocket change for these people, but nobody wanted the hassle. A ship without a modern core was dead weight. To break it down would require industrial lasers working for months. It was a financial black hole. 500 credits. Wallace tried, his voice tightening. Nothing. The ventilation fans hummed in the background. 100 credits. Please, gentlemen, the docking authorities require this berth cleared by tomorrow cycle. Still nothing. The ship was a joke. It was a relic from a time when humanity hadn't figured out how to bend space, so we just strapped massive engines to impenetrable boxes and hoped for the best. The wider galaxy thought we were insane. They still did. 10 credits. Wallace sighed, dropping his shoulders. Can I get 10 credits just to transfer the legal liability? I stood up. The metal chair scraped loudly against the floor. Heads turned. A few aliens nudged each other, pointing their slender, immaculate fingers at my grease-stained jumpsuit. 15, I said. My voice sounded rough, unused to shouting over a crowd. Wallace blinked. I have a bid of 15 credits from the Terran in the back. Do I hear 20? The room was dead quiet. A Kalan near the front actually laughed out loud, a high, musical sound that grated on my nerves. Going once, Wallace said quickly, eager to offload the headache. Going twice. Sold. The gavel came down. The digital chime echoed through the bay. My datapad buzzed in my pocket, signaling the transfer of 15 credits. Just like that, I owned a 2-million-ton problem. I walked down the aisle to the clerk's desk to finalize the transfer. The clerk handed me a physical data chip containing the ship's ancient registry codes. It was cold to the touch. "You understand," the clerk whispered, leaning over the counter. "If that monstrosity breaks orbit and damages the tether, the Coalition will hold you financially responsible for the station's structural integrity." "I understand," I said. I snatched the chip. I walked out of the auction house and into the neon-lit corridors of the orbital station. I didn't have a plan. Not really. I just knew that the galaxy was changing. The border skirmishes with the Outer Rim warlords were getting worse. Energy shields were great until they got overloaded by concentrated pulse fire, and then those beautiful glass ships shattered like cheap ornaments. I needed a way out. I needed something that wouldn't shatter. I tapped my comms earpiece. "Chloe, you there?" Static hissed, followed by the sound of a hydro spanner hitting a metal deck. "Yeah, Arthur, I'm here. Tell me you didn't buy the brick." "I bought the brick," I said. "Meet me at airlock 4. Bring the heavy cutters and the jump cables." "You're an idiot, Arthur. You know that, right?" 15 credits, Chloe. I couldn't afford not to. Airlock 4 was at the absolute edge of the station's habitation ring. The umbilical tube was a fragile, flexible corridor made of reinforced polymer. It stretched across 100 meters of empty void, connecting the station to the side of my new ship. Standing at the viewport, I got my first real look at her. The hololith hadn't done the sheer scale of the ship justice. Hull 404 blocked out the stars. Her hull was scarred, pock-marked with micrometeorite strikes and the blackened scorch marks of ancient battles. There was no registry name painted on her flank, just thick, overlapping plates of armor that looked like the scales of a dead, mechanical beast. Chloe walked up beside me, dragging a grav sled loaded with diagnostic gear and heavy-duty plasma torches. She wiped a smudge of grease off her cheek. She was short, built like a tank herself, and possessed the most abrasive personality on the station. She was also the best mechanic I had ever met. "Look at the state of it," Chloe muttered, staring out the glass. "It's a flying tomb. The docking logs say she's been sitting here dead for 80 years. The station authorities only kept her latched because the magnetic locks rusted shut." "Let's crack her open," I said. We cycled the airlock. The umbilical tube swayed gently as we walked across. The silence of the void pressed in on us, heavy and absolute. The ship's outer airlock door was manual. No electronic keypad, no biometric scanner. Just a massive steel wheel covered in decades of frost. "Help me with this," I grunted, grabbing the cold metal. Chloe grabbed the other side. We planted our mag boots and pulled. The wheel groaned, a deep metallic screech that vibrated up my arms and rattled my teeth. Ice cracked off the bulkheads in jagged sheets. With a final agonizing heave, the locking mechanisms disengaged. The heavy door swung outward. Stale, freezing air rushed past us, smelling of old iron and dust. We clicked on our shoulder-mounted flashlights and stepped inside. The interior was pitch black. Our beams cut through the darkness, illuminating wide utilitarian corridors. There were no sleek white panels or ambient mood lighting. It was bare metal, exposed conduit, and heavy blast doors. It was built for war, not comfort. "Gravity plating is dead," Chloe noted, floating slightly as she deactivated her mag boots to test it. She slammed them back down. "Atmosphere is thin, but breathable." "Barely. Scrubbers must have entered a chemical stasis loop." "We need to find the bridge, or engineering." "Engineering," Chloe said. "No point sitting in the captain's chair if the heart isn't beating." We navigated by the crude, stenciled maps on the bulkheads. The ship was a maze of reinforced bulkheads and redundant blast doors. Every section could be sealed off. If a hull breach happened in one sector, the rest of the ship wouldn't even notice. We found the main reactor room an hour later. It was located in the dead center of the ship, wrapped in another 5 meters of solid shielding. I swept my flashlight over the core. It wasn't a glowing, ethereal plasma web. It was a massive, cylindrical, solid fission reactor. It was ugly, it was dangerous, and it was built to run on practically anything combustible. "Well, I'll be damned," Chloe whispered, walking up to the primary control console. She wiped a thick layer of dust off the screen. "It's an old reliable, a Titan-class burner. They outlawed these in the core systems because they produced too much heat. The aliens couldn't figure out how to cool them without massive venting systems." "Can you start it?" I asked. Chloe unslung a diagnostic tablet from her belt and plugged a hardline cable into an ancient data port beneath the console. She tapped the screen, her eyes scanning lines of archaic code. "The ignition sequence is physical," she said. "No remote start. We have to manually open the primary fuel valves, prime the induction coils, and hit it with enough voltage to jump the gap. It needs a massive electrical spike." "I brought the jump cables," I said, gesturing to the heavy, insulated wires on the grav sled. "We'll need to tie them directly into the station's grid through the umbilical," Chloe said. "It's going to trip every breaker in Sector 4. "Let them complain." My comms earpiece crackled. It wasn't static this time. It was a localized transmission. "Arthur, you in that floating garbage can?" I sighed. I recognized the voice. It was Briggs. He was a debt collector for the local syndicate, a man who made his living breaking fingers and impounding ships. "I'm busy, Briggs," I said into the mic. "You're trespassing," Briggs replied. His voice was smooth, oily. "Station logs show the deed transferred to you 10 minutes ago, which means you now owe the syndicate back pay for 80 years of docking fees. That comes out to roughly 400,000 credits. The auction was clear of liens, Briggs. You know the law. Law is a funny word out here, Arthur. You have 24 hours to vacate the berth and hand over the ship, or my boys are going to breach that airlock and take it out of your hide. Don't make me come in there." The line went dead. I looked at Chloe. She was already hooking the thick cables into the reactor's primary intake nodes. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "I heard it," she said, wrenching a heavy bolt tight. "Means we have less than 24 hours to get these engines online and break the tether. Grab that manual valve on the wall, the big red one. When I say pull, you pull until your shoulders dislocate." I walked over to the valve. It was the size of a steering wheel, rusted tight. I planted my boots on the deck plate and gripped the cold steel. "Ready?" I said. Chloe tapped her tablet, initiating a handshake protocol with the station's grid. "Bypassing the umbilical limiters, now. Stealing their juice. Pull, Arthur!" I hauled on the wheel. It didn't budge. I strained, feeling the muscles in my back scream. "Come on, you piece of junk!" I grunted through gritted teeth. With a sudden, violent crack, the rust broke. The wheel spun. "Valves open!" Chloe shouted over a sudden, rising whine. "Injecting the charge!" For a second, nothing happened. The silence hung in the air, mocking us. Then, deep beneath our feet, something moved. It wasn't a sound. It was a vibration. A low, guttural thrum that traveled up through the heavy deck plates and into my bones. The ship groaned. The massive cylindrical core in front of us let out a deafening, percussive thump. The deck shuddered violently. I grabbed a railing to stay upright. Another thump, faster this time. Then a steady, roaring rhythm. It sounded like the heartbeat of a mechanical titan waking from a long, cold sleep. Amber emergency lights flickered on overhead, casting long, harsh shadows across the engineering bay. The air scrubbers kicked in with a squeal of rusted bearings, blowing 50 years of dust into our faces. Chloe stood by the console, her face bathed in the yellow glow of the ancient monitors, slowly booting up. A wild, unhinged grin spread across her face. "Artie!" she yelled over the roar of the core. "She's not dead. She was just waiting." I looked around the cavernous room. The temperature was already rising. The frost on the bulkheads was melting, dripping onto the floor in steady streams. We hadn't just bought a ship. We had bought a fortress, and for the first time in a long time, I actually felt safe. "Let's get to the bridge," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. "We need to see what else 15 credits bought us before Briggs decides to knock on the front door." We didn't take the elevators. The shafts were pitch black, and I wasn't about to trust 80-year-old suspension cables with my life. Instead, we climbed the central maintenance ladders, 5 decks up, straight through the spine of the ship. The heat radiating from the Titan core followed us, baking the stale air, smelling intensely of ozone and scorched grease. My muscles burned. Every time my boots hit a metal rung, the sound echoed down the massive vertical shaft. We reached the top. The blast door to the bridge was sealed shut, painted with a faded yellow chevron. It lacked a digital interface, just a heavy hydraulic wheel similar to the airlock, flanked by 2 thick manual override levers. I grabbed the left lever. Chloe took the right. We threw our weight backward. Hydraulics screamed in protest, dust raining down on our shoulders as the thick steel door slowly parted. We stepped onto the bridge. It didn't look like a command center. It looked like a bunker. There were no sweeping panoramic viewports or elegant holographic projection tables. The front of the room was dominated by 3 small, thick rectangular windows made of layered armor glass, currently sealed behind heavy outer blast shutters. The consoles were arranged in a tight semicircle, covered in analog toggle switches, physical throttle levers, and cathode ray monitors. It was a room designed for people who expected to take heavy fire and needed to keep fighting while the world burned around them. Chloe dropped her tool bag onto the nearest deck plating. The heavy thud was swallowed by the sheer density of the room. She walked over to the engineering station, blowing a thick layer of dust off a row of switches. "Let's see if the secondary batteries took the charge," she muttered, flipping a massive red toggle. A heavy clunk resonated beneath the floorboards. Then, a low hum filled the room. One by one, the ancient cathode monitors flickered to life, casting a harsh, pale green glow across the bridge. Lines of archaic, blocky text began scrolling rapidly down the screens. "Boot sequence initiated," Chloe read, leaning close to the screen. "Systems coming online. Life support. Grav plating. Navigational gyros. Arthur, get to the captain's chair. You're going to want to see this." I walked to the center of the room. The chair wasn't plush memory foam. It was a rigid, high-backed shock seat bolted directly into the deck, outfitted with a heavy 5-point harness. I sat down. The console in front of me lit up, displaying the ship's primary structural schematic in wireframe green. A string of text blinked at the top of the display. United Nations Space Command. Hull designation 404. Registered name, UN's Goliath. "Goliath," I whispered. It fit. "I'm pulling up the tactical readouts," Chloe said. Her fingers flew across a bulky mechanical keyboard. Wallace wasn't lying. 0 energy shielding. No plasma webs. But look at the armor density. It's not just layered steel. It's a honeycomb structure of depleted uranium and tungsten, filled with a non-Newtonian shock-absorbent gel. The hull is 6 meters thick at its thinnest point. "What about weapons?" I asked, scanning my own board. No lasers, she confirmed, a grin evident in her voice. No plasma casters. The core worlds probably looked at the registry, saw a lack of directed energy weapons, and wrote her off as a cargo hauler. But they didn't read the fine print. She hit a key. My monitor flashed. Twin spine-mounted magnetic accelerator cannons, Chloe said, reading off the data. Railguns, Arthur. They fire 2-ton solid tungsten slugs at 0.04% the speed of light. She's also packing 20 automated point defense rotary cannons covering the flanks. It's all kinetic. It's all physical. The galaxy had moved past kinetic weapons a century ago. Lasers were clean. Plasma was efficient. Solid ammunition was considered barbaric, heavy, and a logistical nightmare. But energy shields were designed to disperse heat and light. They weren't designed to stop a 2-ton block of metal moving at a fraction of light speed. A single shot from this ship would punch straight through a Kalan dreadnought like a bullet through wet paper. Suddenly, a harsh, blaring klaxon ripped through the air. Red emergency lights began strobing on the bridge. "Proximity alarm!" Chloe shouted, scrambling back to the sensor station. "Outer hull, port side, near airlock 4. We've got a company." I slammed my fist onto the comms panel, engaging the external frequencies. "Briggs, you're early." Briggs's voice crackled over the bridge speakers, devoid of his usual oily charm. He sounded furious. "I warned you, Arthur. My boys just clamped 2 breaching pods onto your hull. You have 60 seconds to open that airlock, or we cut our way in, and I feed you to the station's recycling grinders." I looked at the external camera feed on my monitor. 2 Syndicate boarding skiffs were clamped hard onto the Goliath's port side. Sparks were already flying in the vacuum as heavy industrial thermal lances chewed into the outer armor. "They brought plasma cutters," I said to Chloe. She looked at the structural readout and laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound. "They're trying to burn through 6 meters of heat-dispersing armor designed to survive a localized nuclear blast. They could stand out there for a month, and the inner bulkhead wouldn't even get warm." "Briggs," I said into the mic, "you're wasting your time. Go home." "Cut the comms and cut the lock," Briggs barked to someone in the background. "The feed cut out." "They aren't leaving," Chloe said, her amusement fading. "Station control is going to notice the fireworks. We need to go. Now." "Can we decouple the umbilical?" "I'm trying," she said, wrestling with the docking controls. "The magnetic clamps are rusted shut. They aren't releasing. We are physically tethered to the station's mooring arm." I gripped the heavy throttle levers on my console. They were cold, solid iron. "If the clamps won't let go, we take the arm with us." "Arthur, you're crazy!" Chloe yelled over the blaring klaxons. "That mooring arm is reinforced durasteel. If we try to rip it out, the sheer kinetic feedback could tear our port side open." 6 meters of armor, Chloe. You said it yourself." I began flipping the ignition toggles for the primary thrusters. "Divert all auxiliary power to the main drive. Shut down life support in sectors 3 through 9. Give me everything you have." "Routing power now," she grunted, slamming her palms against the heavy switches. "Reactor output at 40%. 50. 60. The deck beneath our feet began to vibrate. It wasn't the steady, rhythmic heartbeat of the waking core anymore. It was a violent, ascending roar. The Goliath was angry. Through the external cameras, I could see the Syndicate skiffs still clamped to our side, completely unaware of the massive engines spooling up beneath them. Their thermal lances continued to spark uselessly against the hull. "Station control is hailing us," Chloe shouted. "They're screaming about an unauthorized launch sequence." "Ignore them. Are the primary thrusters primed?" "Primed and pressurized." I tightened the 5-point harness across my chest. I looked at the digital readout. Thrust capacity was in the green. "Hold on," I said. I shoved the heavy iron throttles all the way forward. There was no smooth, elegant acceleration. No gentle hum of anti-gravity manipulators compensating for inertia. Just pure, unadulterated violence. The Goliath kicked like a mule. A wall of solid force slammed me back into my seat, driving the breath from my lungs. The entire ship shrieked in mechanical agony. The sound was deafening, metal tearing, bulkheads groaning, the massive fusion drive roaring with the fury of a dying star. On the external feed, the station's massive umbilical tube stretched taut. The heavy Durasteel mooring arm buckled. For 2 agonizing seconds, we were locked in a tug-of-war with a 100-million-ton space station. Then, the station lost. The mooring arm snapped with the force of an artillery shell. A massive shockwave rippled through the tether, violently whipping back toward the station and severing the umbilical tube. The physical backlash hit the Syndicate skiffs. One of them was cleanly torn from our hull, spiraling out of control into the void, its engines failing to compensate for the sudden, violent spin. The other one remained clamped, but its plasma cutter shattered against our armor. The operator undoubtedly crushed against the bulkhead by the G-force. "We are clear," Chloe screamed, her face pressed back against her seat by the acceleration. "Mooring severed. Hull integrity at 99.8%. The violent shaking slowly subsided as we broke the station's gravitational pull. The heavy G-force eased, leaving a dull ache in my chest. I reached up and hit the switch to raise the primary blast shutters. The heavy steel plates over the forward windows ground upward, locking into the ceiling with a heavy thud. Space poured into the room. The endless, cold expanse of the void, dotted with distant stars. Below us, the orbital station was shrinking rapidly, emergency lights strobing wildly across its habitation rings. We had just ripped a hole in their docking bay, and they were scrambling to seal it. "Thrusters at cruising output," Chloe reported, unbuckling her harness and stepping over to my console. She was out of breath, wiping a smear of blood from a small cut on her forehead. She looked out the window. "We actually did it." "Yeah," I said, relaxing my grip on the throttle levers. My hands were shaking. "We did it." I looked down at the tactical map blinking on my console. Beyond the station, out in the deep black, the borders were burning. The sleek, beautiful ships of the Coalition were fighting a losing battle against the warlord fleets. They were fighting with light, trying to pierce shields with focused heat, dancing around each other in a deadly, fragile ballet. They had forgotten how to fight dirty. They had forgotten how to take a punch. I tapped the console, running a diagnostic on the twin spine-mounted railguns. The massive autoloaders beneath our feet clanked heavily, loading the first 2-ton tungsten slugs into the firing chambers. "Set a course for the frontier, Chloe," I said, leaning back in the rigid captain's chair. "You want to take this brick into a combat zone?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Just the 2 of us?" "We aren't a brick," I corrected her, watching the green phosphor text of the ship's name reflect in the thick armor-glass window. "We're an anvil, and it's time we reminded the galaxy what happens when you put your head on the block." 15 credits. I smiled. Best damn investment I ever made. If you enjoyed this descent into the gritty, oil-stained heart of Terran engineering, hit that like button to keep the engines running. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another HFY sci-fi story. What would you name a 2-million-ton heavily armored Terran dreadnought? Drop your best ship names in the comments below. Share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans, and until next time, keep your armor thick and your rail guns loaded.